And welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas digital version. I'm Stan Grant, coming to you live from the Ethics Centre here in Sydney, Australia. We'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands we are meeting here in Sydney. I'd also like to acknowledge the Indigenous people of all lands, from wherever you are watching this program or engaged in this session here tonight. Tonight's session is called Dangerous Fictions, looking at why Australia seems incapable of making peace with the truth of its own past. Our keynote guest is Marcia Langton.
Stan, what I want to talk about tonight is a very interesting problem that's puzzled me for a long time. And it's not just the question of racism. People think that racism is just discrimination by one group against another group on the basis of some physical characteristics. And so in Australia, what we see is racism expressed most commonly as a kind of white racism against people of colour, or against people who appear to be Chinese. We've seen a lot of that lately. But what I've discovered in discussing this widely with people is that, in fact, there's something very strange happening in Australia, and that the racism towards Aboriginal people is something more than racism, and also something very different. So many years ago, when I was a much younger scholar, I wrote a fair bit about race, and I continued to. But lately I've come to the conclusion that there is something very special and peculiar about the hatred of Aboriginal people. And of course, it is summed up in many Aboriginal slogans. I think most Aboriginal people sense it, and sense it from a young age. So, you know, Australia has a black history, for instance. And your opening comments reflect this sense that we Aboriginal people have of a very peculiar stance towards us that cannot be captured in the concept of racism. There's something more going on. But the other thing that struck me was that if you look at the cases one by one, and also related cases such as the children detained in the Dondale Detention Centre. So I'm sure you know that all of the children in the juvenile justice detention system in the Northern Territory are Aboriginal. And then if you look at photos of those children, especially those historical photos from that period prior to the appointment of the Royal Commission into the Dondale Juvenile Centre, you'll see that many of them are white-skinned, very fair, and yet they are Aboriginal. We know who their families are, and they've come out of that system of torture and abuse that they suffered, and have become, some of them have become young activists now, and are well regarded now in the Aboriginal community. So I've tried to explain to people from other countries and Australians who do not understand these problems that the Black Lives Matter movement also includes our concern for all those Aboriginal people who are fair-skinned, who've died in custody. And it led me to thinking, so what is the racism against fair-skinned Aboriginal people about? What is going on? So it's very clear then that, and I really despise the terminology, and I really don't like the theory and thinking behind this kind of terminology, but it is the available terminology, and it's Aborigines and settlers. It's not simply racism. It's a settler population that cannot come to terms with its Indigenous population, its autochthonous population, its native population, it's the people descended from the pre-existing population, utterly incapable of coming to terms with living alongside people who are descended from humans who arrived here 65,000 years ago, possibly 120,000 years ago, regarded by many archaeologists as the dawn of modern humanity. And so when our old people say, we came from this place and only here, you can see what they mean. It's impossible to imagine the timescale and to make sense of it. And so I think the peculiar hatred that led to the shocking torture of children in the Don Dale Centre, children of many colours, some of them very fair, is that expression of settler rage against the people with whom they will not treat. So I think I might leave it there and let you ask me some questions. There's so much more to say about this topic, but I think now we need to really think about these matters very carefully as several jurisdictions move to negotiate treaties. And as I believe a government in the future will do, allow for a referendum so that Australians can vote to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. And that will truly change the nature of racism. And I hope that the peculiar racism inflicted on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will evolve and will change and will disappear, and that we as the descendants of the original occupants will be recognised as people to be contended with, as citizens with a special claim on the nation. Because, just as they found in the Griffiths case, it is unconstitutional to extinguish our property and our rights without consent, and compensation is owed. And if that compensation takes the form of recognition, I, for one, would find that to be a very good outcome for all Australians. Thank you.